I just don't even know why there aren't uprisings all over the country. Maybe there will be.
People need to start taking to the streets. This is a dictator.
You know, there needs to be unrest in the streets for as long as there's unrest in our lives.
Enemies of the state.
Show me where it says that protests are supposed to be polite and peaceful.
Do something about your dad's immigration practices, you feckless.
When they go low, we kick them.
How do you resist the temptation to run up and wring her neck?
The biggest terror threat in this country is white men, most of them radicalized right, to the right.
I thought he should have punched him in the face. I said, even if you lost, he insulted your wife.
Yes.
He came down the escalator and called Mexicans rapists and murderers. He said, well, what do you think I should have done? I said, I think you should have punched him in the face and then gotten out of the race. You would have been a hero.
I'd like to punch him in the face. I said if we were in high school, I'd take him behind the gym and beat the hell out of him.
Punch some people in the face!
When was the last time an actor assassinated a president?
They're still going to have to go out and put a bullet in Donald Trump, and that's a fact.
Look, as his character is stabbed to death.
Where is John Wilkes Booth when you need him?
That's it right there, pulling up.
I have thought an awful lot about blowing up the White House.
A Missouri state senator is under investigation by the Secret Service after saying she hopes President Trump is assassinated.
I will go and take Trump out tonight.
What's up, everybody? It's me, Robbie Bobby, from the Robbie Bobby Podcast, and welcome to our series on America's domestic homegrown terrorist groups. That's right. We're going right at these people. We're going to be exposing them as well as others. I got something funny coming, not in this first episode, but in episode number 2, where I go about on our Facebook page, and like I was going to show you like the responses and some of the posts that come on here. It's just hilarious. I know a lot of other people do it the same thing, but it's me doing it, and you know how much fun we have here. But again, thank you for joining me, and we're going to get into it, and so get ready. So, yeah, and a little bit different camera. I forgot to turn this camera on, but that's all right. We're just going to stick with this one. I like the way it's looking right now. So we're going to kick off our expose, if you will, about the domestic liberal Democrat terrorist group Antifa. We have help from Eddie Nago and his book Unmasked Inside Antifa's Radical Plan to Destroy Democracy, which is a great read and has lots of insight on how on the inner workings of how a terrorist group can operate in the United States freely. We've seen some of the videos on it, and of course we're going to show them here as well. You know, they have help from the liberal Marxist Democrat Party, the mainstream media, of course, and very mostly rich white liberals, Hollywood elites, Jane Fonda, Oprah, Meryl Streep, you know, the usual, you know, suspects, and of course other millionaire, stars, quote unquote, like Jay-Z, Beyonce, and other groups that fund them, Source Foundation and other nutbag liberal groups. So, but we're going to get in depth from how they got their start, which is very, very interesting. I didn't know a lot about this stuff, but that's why I do my research, and how they have infiltrated American youth on college campuses as well as mainstream America. We've seen as of late, the riots and the professional protesters in full support of Hamas, the terrorist group from Gaza who was voted into power by the Palestinian people in 2006, who is funded by Iran. And we all know how Obama and the Biden administrations sent billions, like on pallets of cash to Iran that helped in the funding in the attacks, not only in Israel back on October 7th, ending the ceasefire that was in place, but here in the U.S. as well. The same Democrat leaders calling for a ceasefire now, as well as the pro-terrorist groups protesting, seem to forget there was a ceasefire already. Now, I know the leaders knew this, but they know the sheep mostly ignorant students that they feed the propaganda to don't know this. And I say ignorant and not stupid because if you're stupid, you're just dumb. Ignorant is that you haven't learned yet. So a lot of people, when they grow up, finally learn this stuff. But that's why it's important to stop the indoctrination in these schools and on college campuses by liberal professors and academic heads. We also know Iran was basically broke when Trump was in office, but due to China, CDC, Dr. Fauci-funded virus that got loose from a Wuhan lab and caused the lockdown and gave the left opportunity to enact their mail-in ballot scam while changing voting laws in the middle of an election in blue states illegally and removing poll watchers while trucking in fraudulent ballots to install what we all know, and some of us knew then, the election that Biden was not only incompetent, as we see still today, but severely compromised with his knowledge and participation as VP under Obama in his son Hunter's overseas illegal business dealings with enemies of America. Now, China, Russia, Romania, Ukraine, and the quid pro quo of Burisma by Biden, and on and on. Here's a clip of Biden admitting to the quid pro quo. Roll it!
I remember going over convincing our team, or others, to convincing us that we should be providing for loan guarantees. And I went over, for, I guess, the 12th, 13th time to Kyiv, and I was supposed to announce that there was another $1 billion loan guarantee. And I had gotten a commitment from Poroshenko and from Yatsenyuk that they would take action against the state prosecutor, and they didn't. So they said they were walking out to press conference. I said, no, I'm not going to, or we're not going to give you the $1 billion. They said, you have no authority. You're not the president. The president said. I said, call him. I said, I'm telling you, you're not getting the $1 billion. I said, you're not getting the $1 billion. I'm going to be leaving here. And I think it was, 6 hours? I said, I'm leaving in 6 hours. If the prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money. Well, son of a bitch. Got fired. And they put in place someone who was solid.
Now, that being said, from Biden himself, again, I did this on another podcast, but I love bringing this up because of all, the Ukraine call with President Trump and how the false impeachment and how that went. We know Iran funds Hezbollah, the Muslim Brotherhood, and many more, including those terrorist groups mentioned here in the U.S. We know Biden's handlers lifted sanctions on Iran so they could sell oil for profit and the funding of terror groups all through the Middle East. They allowed the Russians to finish building the Nord Stream pipeline and also lift sanctions on them, Putin's buddy, while shutting down our own Keystone pipeline, making us dependent again on countries that hate us. We saw the botched surrender in Afghanistan where 13 service members and countless civilians were killed. The Taliban is now back in control, raping women and children, not allowing girls to go to school, and all the Islamic Nazi hate crap that Islamic fascists do. And this Democrat Marxist administration is sending, now listen, $160 million a month. That was a last check, which was yesterday. Now, $160 million a month to a terrorist organization. Think of all the billions that have gone to Ukraine, which is a different story, but look at all the money they have sent to terrorists in other countries. This is the same party and faux testers that cry about the rich not paying their fair share. Imagine if liberal Democrats actually care about the poor. Look at what they could do to help with all the money they send overseas. And not just liberal Democrats, but liberal rhinos as well. Liberal rhinos, what the hell is that? Republican in name only. They're basically Democrats. We know the Biden-Harris open border and all the money they spend on them, housing, food, debit cards, clothing, education now. We just had schools shutting down to house illegal immigrants. Illegal. I'm going to say it again. Illegal. How much of that money do you think could have helped the community here at home? They're always complaining about the shape of schools and how they're all ran down and just no books, sharing books. I got videos on that too from students. Now, they've allowed terrorists and criminals from nearly 150 countries walk right in. We see the rapes, the murders, drugs like fentanyl from China, again, one of Biden's family financiers, and the rampant crime they have allowed to plague our cities and neighborhoods. Just saw last week with the Venezuelan gang taking over apartment buildings in Aurora, Colorado, with the liberal Democrat governor saying, oh, it's just imaginary with a councilwoman. Like, we got it on tape. The lady taped it for a year, and nobody would come help her. Now, all this fuels the fake protesting by these groups who claim to fight all this fascism and racism. It's an effing joke. And, again, we're going to get into it. Antifa isn't some new idea conjured up by leftist youth, or as Jerry Nadler, Democrat garbage from New York, says, he never heard of them and they're just an idea. Well, which is it, Jerry? And that's rhetorical. Either you've heard of them or you haven't. We start with an excerpt from, and nope, you know what? We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with a word from our sponsors. All right, we're back. Thank you so much for joining us on the Robbie Bobby podcast with our first episode in a series called American Terrorist Groups. Okay, we're going to start with an excerpt from Andy's book, Unmasked, about the origin of Antifa, as they are known here at the Robbie Bobby podcast. But here's how the media's portrayal started, and some of y'all remember this, mostly peaceful protests, but as well as how they started to cover for the violence and the hatred that was about to be unleashed by their own party and about to be unleashed once again here pretty soon, I guarantee it. So, it starts out. In late October 2016, a magazine called The Week published an issue that predicted how supporters of Donald Trump would react when he inevitably lost the presidential election to Hillary Clinton. Keyword there, inevitably. They had already predicted that. So they're already setting this up. The piece was titled, After the Election. The cover artwork showed angry Trump supporters with ugly, contorted faces carrying guns, weapons, and torches. On November 8th, 2016, the day of the election, Sally Kohn, or Kohn, K-O-H-N, a left-wing CNN commentator at the time, tweeted, "My sense is that if Trump wins, Hillary's supporters will be sad. If Hillary wins, Trump supporters will be angry. Important difference." The tweet received thousands of shares and likes. The Week's cover illustration of Kohn's tweet ended up being prescient, but both misidentified the would-be rioters. Hillary Clinton lost, thankfully. I put that in there. And those who took to the streets in Portland were not wearing red Make America Great Again hats, but rather black uniforms. They were Antifa. Carrying bats and other melee weapons, Antifa militants smashed property in downtown Portland and started fires on the streets. They caused over $1 million damage in one night. The rioting lasted for days, leading to more than 100 arrests. In Austin, Texas, around 200 people gathered at the state capitol to protest the election results. Many of them were masked. A group began to attack the few Trump supporters who showed up to counter-demonstrate. Police made 6 arrests, identifying them as members of the Red Guards Austin, an Antifa group, or Antifa as I call it. Similar carnage was repeated a few months later during the day of the presidential inauguration, where President Trump won. I added that. In January 2017, in Washington, D.C., marauding gangs of Antifa overwhelmed the police by breaking windows and hurling projectiles. They sent a limousine owned by a Muslim immigrant on fire. The rioting caused more than $100,000 in damages. Less than 2 weeks later, more Antifa violence was repeated on the West Coast. This time at the University of California, Berkeley, home of free speech as long as we agree with it and approve it. Again, I added that. On February 1st, 2017, around 1,500 left-wing protesters amassed on campus to shut down the scheduled speaking event featuring right-wing provocateur Milo Yiannopoulos. Yes, that's how I said it. Yiannopoulos. 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 That's good. Masked Antifa extremists started fires on campus, destroyed property through incendiary devices. I can't say that word today. I don't know why. Hurled rocks at police and assaulted event attendees who lined up outside Sproul Hall. Violent riots continued in Berkeley throughout the summer of 2017, as they did in Portland. Over and over, street violence against individuals, property, and law enforcement was repeated in major U.S. cities, forcing Americans to become quickly acquainted with the Antifa phenomenon. The meteoric rise of the movement, virtually unknown to Americans only a few years ago, has led some to believe that Antifa is new. This is wrong. The militant far-left movement and ideology have existed for over a half a century in Europe. It has had decades to develop a coherent ideology and both violent and nonviolent strategies, like doxing. Again, I added that, but it's in the book, and we'll get to that. Nonviolent strategies to undermine liberal democracy under the guise of fighting fascism. So, liberal democracy is not what we see today, or liberal socialism. It was different back then, and we'll get under that. But it's under the guise, as in disguise, of fighting fascism. You can't be fascist and fight fascism. Yeah, that doesn't make sense. So, to Mr. Nadler, New York Democrat garbage, and all the left-wing Democrat Marxists, the garbage from the Squad, AOC, all of them, and all their anti-American and Jewish-hating racist crap that we've seen. There you go, yourself. Again, that's from Andy Ngo's book Unmasked, Inside Antifa's Radical Plan to Destroy Democracy. Now, he goes on, and it's going to get real interesting. This is kind of a backstory of this, so we're going to pause, take another little break, and we'll be right back on the Robbie Bobby Podcast. All right, welcome back, everybody, to the Robbie Bobby Podcast and domestic homegrown terrorist groups here in America. We're focusing and exposing Antifa as well as other groups that we're going to get to. But we're going to start off with here because these are the most violent and radical from the left that we've seen in a long time. Now we're going to get into some of the history, how they were founded over in Europe back in the 20s. And so here we go. Thanks again to Andy Ngo and his book Unmasked, Inside Antifa's Radical Plan to Destroy Democracy. And you can always pick that up on Amazon anywhere. And again, thanks to him. Andy goes on. So the original Antifa in Europe was established long ago and comes from a long line of Europe's paramilitary political groups. Back then, all political parties had them. In the 1920s, a group of Stalinist-like thugs called the Red Front Riders' League was one of the most violent at that time. They clashed with mostly liberal and socialist groups rather than fighting the Nazis. Imagine that. They were disbanded in 1929. In May 1932, the German Communist Party announced the formation of the, now this is in German, so I'm going to do my best to pronounce it, Anti-Fascist, no I'm not. Basically, it's Anti-Fascist Action, which means Anti-Fascist Action, commonly referred to as Antifa. A new paramilitary communist group. Shocker. This is the original Antifa and the group that contemporary Antifa around the world today take inspiration from. The paramilitary was created to bring together a coalition of communists at the community level to oppose and fight political opponents. Now, real quick, I'm going to say this again. A coalition of communists at the community level. Now, if we think community level, that would sound like some community agitators. Who was one of the most renowned, famous community agitators? Oh, Barack Obama. That's right, in his own words. Well, he's a community activist, but we all know community agitators go around agitating everyone until they get their way. And he got his start in the home of Bill Ayers, founder of the Weather Underground, a very violent left-wing group, which we'll touch on later, and where Obama got his start. Now, Andy goes on. Through calling itself the Anti-Fascist Action, those who served as decision-makers on its executive boards consisted of members of the German Communist Party and other allied communist groups. Simply put, the Anti-Fascist Action was a communist organization under a thinly veiled new name. It held rallies and developed its own propaganda. Sound familiar? The two-flag logo used by today's Antifa groups is based on the original red flag's logo of the Anti-Fascist Action. The two red flags symbolized the union of communism and socialism. Like the other communist paramilitaries before it, the Anti-Fascist Action was involved in political street brawls, which we see all the time. They also acted as security and self-defense for communists who lived together in select neighborhoods and apartment buildings. Now, it's like we see today with all the protest groups out there under the Democrat Marxist Party coming together to try and end America as we know it because it's unfair, it's fascism, and racist, and which we all know that's not true. But little do these little brown shirts of today realize that if they actually get their way, they will be the first to go. It's what communist, fascist, racist political parties like those of the old Europe and those of today in America do. They go off after the softest and the weakest. Now, don't get kind of out there like, oh, they're just a bunch of little rich white kids, which they mainly are, or, they like to dress up as cats in school, and which they do, but some are very violent and, they are armed to the teeth. So I hope you all are getting ready out there. That being said, let's take BLM, for instance. They came out to protest shootings of young black men by white and black police officers, but not once have they ever protested the daily and nightly killings of young black youth by young black youth in the city of Chicago, where the DNC just had its final insurrection of Joe Biden. The founders of BLM got rich, just like any other liberal group, and never did a damn thing to help the black community or any black person for that matter. And remember, Antifa joined right alongside them and helped with the violence and destruction, claiming to fight against fascism and racism, but destroyed entire city blocks of predominantly black-owned businesses and attacked innocent people. Say it again. The people that were pretending to fight fascism and racism destroyed entire city blocks and small businesses owned by mostly black people. I don't know. I can add 1 and 1 and 2 and 2, and that I don't know. Now, they did kill some people in the process. Remember, these riots were in many cities throughout America, and they're mostly inner cities. We'll get to Chaz and Chop in Portland, Oregon in another episode. But, the murders and the race by Antifa Black Bloc and those that were forced and allowed to die due to the fact they would not allow EMS or police to enter and care for these for those that were assaulted in the Chaz and Chop areas of the 6th block, where they took over a police station, they burnt down a bunch of stuff and blocked it all off, and people were starving towards the end. And again, we're going to touch on that. But Andy goes on. From 1949 to 1990, East Germany existed as a communist state carved out of the Weimar Republic by the Soviet Union, one of World War II's victorious Allied leaders. For over 40 years, the extremely repressive conditions, I'm going to say it again, repressive, not progressive. There's nothing progressive about liberalism. The extremely repressive conditions in East Germany exemplified what Antifa state building actually looks like. That means when Antifa comes in, they build their little Chaz and Chop zones. Now, just as we've seen in Portland's Chaz and Democrat-ran cities through the East German Ministry for State Security, better known as the Stasi. Like in Portland, Citizens were monitored and spied on through a vast apparatus of informants who infiltrated all aspects of life in civil society. The secret police agency, sounds kind of fascist, like Antifa's Black Bloc, was originally modeled to be similar to the Soviet Union's secret police, the KGB. Well, how about that? The Stasi's mandate by the state was to weed out political dissenters and to terrorize the masses into compliance in addition to conducting espionage. Yep, that's pretty much what's happening. Antifa groups today do something similar on a community level. Secret police form a pillar of communism under... Yeah. Secret police form a pillar of... I mean, it's just... The proof is out there. We know they exist, but under Biden's DOJ, nothing's being done about it. Nothing. These groups are allowed to freely operate. You know, no one's held accountable for any of the... You know, it's ridiculous. You know, families, businesses that have been in the family for 50, 60, 70 years are gone. And all these little rich white kids and all these BLM activists, protesters run back to their houses. You know, it's just it's ridiculous. And then here we are, normal everyday Americans trying to work, being accused of all this stuff, of what they're actually doing. But again, that's liberal Marxism for you. Always accuse someone, the other side, of what you're actually doing. Racism, fascism, here we go. Now, under Maoist China, a similar system was developed to spy on its citizens. One can never know if their friend, family member, or spouse was an informant. In East Germany, the mass persecution and psychological warfare against its own citizens suspected of political wrongthink were justified by the communist state in the name of fighting fascism. But to them, fascism referred to the West and its governing system of liberal democracy. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back. Again, thanks for joining us, the Right Body Podcast, for the first episode in this series, American Domestic Terrorist Homegrown Groups, where we're going to be exposing not just Antifa and Antifa members. We're going to be posting videos and all kinds of stuff. And it's just, if you love this country and you love your freedom, you have to pay attention. This is the time. You know, we always think, well, this is the most important election. No, they're all important elections, no matter what. We've seen what happened last time. We know what's about to happen because they're going to try it again. They have the insurrection of Joe Biden, where once again Kamala Harris got 0 primary votes like she did in the 2020 election when she was running, and here she is again. They just put up these puppets that they call us and me, us, whatever, Americans, threats to democracy, President Trump, when they went after him every which way from Sunday, 99 felonies and all this other stuff, so they can go, oh, look, he's a convicted felon, but none of the charges, they were all made up. Again, we're going to get into all that as well as we expose Antifa. Yes, I just did that. Yeah. So stay tuned for next week's episode. We're going to get more into Antifa. And again, thanks to Andy Nago, his book Unmasked: Inside Antifa's Radical Plan to Destroy Democracy. Pick you up a copy, get it on Kindle, get to reading this stuff. We also have some other interesting stuff coming up. Thanks again for joining us. Hit me up, therobbiebobby@gmail.com. Subscribe on YouTube, Facebook, Spotify, anywhere else you can get podcasts that I'm out there on. And we're going to keep going. Love the camera now. It looks pretty good. Hopefully, I just went the roller drop. You never knew I was standing in floors earlier, would you? On that note, see ya. Shh.
At the crowd. This is when the night took a turn. That's when several Molotov cocktails were thrown in the direction of the police line, falling short and hitting a protester whose feet caught on fire.
Tear gas and/or impact weapons. Leave the area immediately.
Fireworks were set, and this is when tear gas was deployed to disperse the crowd. Protesters broke off into smaller groups and eventually regrouped at the park again. Police moved them into the neighborhood near Ventura Elementary School and used even more tear gas. Neighbors say they could smell the tear gas in their homes, and they say police shouldn't have pushed the protesters into their neighborhood.
That was the worst decision ever. This whole neighborhood is full of kids and families and parents. This park gets more usage than any other park I've lived next to. It's constantly full. The policing doesn't need to be like that.
Overall, police say 59 people were arrested Saturday night. They face charges including riot, interfering with a peace officer, and more. Sunday night was another demonstration, this time people gathering at Alberta Park before marching to the North Precinct. Police say once there, people dragged 2 mattresses and yard debris into the street and lit a large fire. They had to call Portland Fire and Rescue to put out the fire as it sent embers into the sky. And that was a concern because of the extremely dry conditions. Officers ended up making 15 arrests and say people had things like a glass jar filled with flammable liquid and a bottle of accelerant, a slingshot, a stun gun, baton, and ballistic vests, including one with the word press on it.
And Portland Mayor Ted Wheeler released a statement about the use of tear gas on Saturday.